Bible through the arts. And it is not just art itself, not visual art. We will talk about a variety of things. But as you can see, this introductory lesson we're calling Transformation or Transformed by the Unexpected. So we'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by that. Obviously you know what this is because I put the name up here, but who has a rain stick? Anybody have one? Oh, I wish I'd known I'd have you today. But I've got the next best thing. Who knows how a rain stick is made? Anybody know anything about a rain stick other than our two rain stick owners?
I thought they just grew in Australia.
No. It is essentially a musical instrument of a type. A rain stick is made from a cactus. Some of those big, tall saguaro cactuses or cacti that are in the Southwest. When it dies, the skeleton of the cactus is taken by the Native American Indians, the Indians that live in that area, and they fill it with either seeds or small pebbles. And when it is filled with seeds or small pebbles and then closed up on either end, it becomes a rain stick. I'm going to share with you a poem about the rain stick. Before we do, I want you to hear the sound of the rain stick. There it is. Notice the pointer on my mouse. If anybody wants one of those, I'll help you out. Okay, let me get him back again. Where did he go? There he is. Okay, we're going through here. Sounds like rain. Let me share with you the poem of Seamus Heaney called The Rain Stick. Seamus Heaney is actually an Irish poet, and he wrote this upon his first visit to the southwestern part of the United States, where he first encountered a rain stick. And you can tell it's written from a poet's point of view, but also from the point of view of almost a child who has found a new treasure that they never knew existed. Up ends the stick, and what happens next is a music that you never would have known to listen for. In a cactus stalk, downpour, sluice rush, spillage, and backwash come flowing through. You stand there like a pipe being played by water. You shake it again lightly, and diminuendo runs through all its scales like a gutter-stopping trickling. And now here comes a sprinkle of drops out of the freshened leaves, then subtle little wet soft grass and daisies. The glitter drizzle, almost breaths of air. Up in the stick again. What happens next is undiminished for having happened once, twice, 10 and 1,000 times before. Who cares if all the music that transpires is the fall of grit or dry seeds through a cactus? You are like a rich man entering heaven through the ear of a raindrop. I want you to remember music that you never would have known to listen for. Amen. Jesus loves me, yes, I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong, they are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. For the Bible. Yes, the Bible. Oh, the Bible You know, music has wonderful, wonderful powers, doesn't it? When you hear that song, some of you remember what we've been talking about in this series of lessons is, how does music transform us? And that's what we're going to focus on today. What is it about music that can transform our lives? And Beach, you pretty much hit a lot of these. That like art, you know, it has some of those elements of narrative that we talked about, the historical context, the history of art and the history of music are very parallel in many ways. We have some of the same eras. We use some different names, but Romanticism, for example, in art is also at the same time we were having Romanticism in music, and there are Impressionist composers, just like there are Impressionist artists and so forth. So the historical context plays a piece. In theater, it is performance, it is community, and it's also improvisation. You know, we talked about last week improvisation in terms of the theater, but it's also obviously a very much part of music. So let's talk just a little bit about that to kind of make a bridge. With theater, when we begin with an improvisation, Buzz and I each had a character. We were a married couple, and that was our character. And then we took the scene that was given to us, the topic, which was deciding what we're going to have for breakfast, which you all gave us, and you gave us that, I think, and we made a scene out of that. Same thing with music, except there's a melody, and then the improvisation is built upon the melody, and you create within that parameter. What musical genre, what musical type do you think of when you think of improvisation? Jazz. There you go. That's typically what we think of. However, musicologists, musical historians, now believe that much of what we really think of as classically composed music was actually improvisation. It began as improvisation and then ultimately was written down. And for example, I'm going to give you a little anecdote. There's the story told of Beethoven, of course, prior to when he went deaf, because we know that he lost his hearing later in life. But early on in his life, when he was in the early stages of his composing, he would be with a group of friends, and you know, all different, every group of friends, depending on what your common thing is, you know, you all have things that you mess with each other and tease each other about. Well, Beethoven's friends love to say, "Hey, Ludwig, come over here. This piano seems to be out of tune." And they'd say, "Listen, no, that's not right. That's out of tune." And Beethoven would come over and he'd go, "Let's do something different." So that would be his way of creating something that ultimately would be what we consider to be a... Okay, so now let's talk about how we move forward, though, after the split. And so we're now into 1100, 1200, 1300, medieval prior to the Renaissance, prior to the Reformation. And with that's when we saw a proliferation of the Gothic architecture of the cathedrals and so forth, Notre Dame and so forth. And of course, those are designed with this idea of pointing up to God. And if you've visited those, you know, I'm sure you've heard all this from the docents that lead you around. But essentially, the idea being that inviting you into that procession that ultimately leads to heaven. And that architecture sets the stage for that. Then we see increased importance of the narrative, the setting, the context, if I talk about. There's an invitation and intimacy that begins to come into these, unlike we saw in those earlier pieces, and an increased use of imagery and symbolism. Let me show you an example of that. Anybody seen this piece? This is by Raphael. And it is called, he did many, many Madonna and Child pictures, but this particular one is Madonna and Child with a book, because of course they had a book, you know, back then. That my point being that these are placed in a more of a contemporary setting for the artist. The figures are historical and biblical. The setting is contemporary, because if you look over here, you see a castle kind of thing over here that would not have been in the original. That would not have been there when Mary was holding Jesus as a baby. And then, of course, the book. And the book is open to the 9th hour prayers, which talk about the crucifixion. And of course, the crucifixion was Jesus was supposed to have died at the 9th hour, 3 o'clock being the 9th hour. So the book is, if you could see it closely enough, you could see some writing that anybody who knew at that time knew that those were the 9th hour prayers. And if you look at the picture, you see Mary obviously looking down at Jesus. Is Jesus looking at Mary, or is he looking somewhere else? He's looking up at his Father, as if to say, I must be about my Father's business. And the significance of him being naked, and was he not chubby? Oh my goodness. Makes me feel better about my babies. Because I definitely have seen that leg before. What is there some significant? We talked last time about nakedness sometimes indicating vulnerability. That's not really the case here. How was nakedness used in the Middle Ages and even into the Renaissance? You know, in art, it's a perfection. Okay, nothing needed to improve upon perfection of the human form. Yes. So we're going to have to conclude because we didn't have time to see everything. I just have to ask you, and if somebody would like to answer, that would be great. And if not, I just want you to think about it. What have you learned over the past 5 weeks? How will you engage with the arts differently going forward? And what music have you heard that you never would have known to listen for? Anybody want to share? Any thoughts on that? Okay. Final thoughts. The biblical drama is played out through the arts in their defining elements, their unique powers, and their ability to communicate, inspire, and transform us. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for making this a delightful 5 weeks.